Chairman Gibbs and Ranking Member Napolitano for holding this hearing. Thank the witnesses for being here. First of all, I want to commend you all for the work that you're doing and the importance of it. With no pun intended, I do have a couple areas of concern myself that are unrelated to pollution of the Great Lakes. One of them is what appears to be a rather abrupt shift in programming and in funding. And I'll start with you, Mr. Kraleski. You talked about the significance of the unprecedented coordination, and I applaud you for that, the unprecedented results, and I applaud you for that. And you use that word, unprecedented coordination, a number of times, and I applaud you for that. My two concerns with regard to the shift in programming and funding relates, forgive me for being parochial, but to the Duluth area. We're proud to have eliminated our first area of concern on the St. Louis River there. But based on the first 5 years of funding, where we had received $4.5 million, there's been a dramatic reduction of almost 3/4 down to 1.2. And based on the first 5 years of work, it had been expected that we would have eliminated all of our areas of concern by 2019, which of course will not happen at this point in time. And that is an area of concern for me, and I'd like you to address that. And then secondly, we've heard from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and they, like you, were celebrating the unprecedented coordination and collaboration. And what I believe they referred to as flexible dollars. And now I see that funding for staffing will be restricted to project-specific. And there's a concern that I have and others have that will reduce the ability for that kind of collaboration and cooperation between state and county and local on a broader basis. So if you could address both of those concerns, it would be much appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, there is no question that in this latest funding cycle, the money that we were able to provide to states for what I would describe as capacity funding was less. And the main reason for that was because the first determination of how much states, including Minnesota, would get as capacity funds was put together back in 2010 when GLRI was funded at a level of $475 million. That was a 5-year allocation, if you will, and that was based on the belief that there would be $475 million. When that during that 5-year period, we did not reduce that annual allocation, even though the amount dropped from $475 million to roughly $300 million a year over the last 4 years. We did not change the allocation during that 5 years. When that grant expired after 5 years and it was time to renegotiate a new grant with the states, we were looking at what was essentially a 37% reduction in the GLRI if we were looking at a $300 million level. If we were looking at a $250 million level that was proposed, that was a 48% reduction compared to what we had back in 2010. That was the main reason why we had to reduce the amount of capacity funding for the states. Your second comment, which I think I'm very glad you raised it, the issue of this project-specific funding. One of the things that we're trying to emphasize—
Well, staffing for project-specific, yeah.
Exactly. One of the things that we're trying to do is make a clearer distinction between funding for capacity and funding for projects. I'll give you an example. Capacity funding for us would be money given to a state, for example, to allow staff to attend meetings, to allow them to travel, for allow them to do overall budgeting over their plan as a whole. Project-specific work would be, for example, staff working on a specific AOC-related project. And one of the things that we've tried to convey to the states is we want them to start putting their staffing needs in their project applications, rather than just relying on capacity grants to take all that into account. So in other words, we think there should be an appropriate amount of capacity funding to do overall planning, but if staff is going to be working on a specific AOC project, our advice to the states is build that number into your project application, build that cost into the project application, and then that will be treated as part of the project. We would intend to fund it, assuming we had the money, but it gets us away from this, is there enough capacity money to do both capacity and project-specific work? The reason we want to do that is because we think if we can more clearly identify that when money has gone to specific projects, it just gives us a better ability to account for that money.
Well, I appreciate that, but having staffing for greater coordination and collaboration, as you were celebrating and I celebrate, it gives the regional groups a greater capacity to adjust as well, depending on what the county state priorities are and what they might want to fund. And so I appreciate you're trying to take a look at a bigger picture. But if the city or the state or the county wants to do something differently but significant, with that coordination, that collaboration, that's how you know about that, and that's how you can adjust to it and make that things happen. Well, I'm about out of time here, but I did want to thank you very much for all the great work you do. This is really important, and I lament the fact, Mr. Chairman, that we celebrate, that we might be able to come up with $300 million, when it's, darn near $200 million short of what we're used to. So, I think we should look at trying to find some ways to authorize a greater expenditure here for this important project. Lastly, Mr. Kramer, and just a quick answer, you talked about if we did away with all the agricultural pollution, we'd reduce it like 40%, and you alerted to the other sources. Do you have any statistics on exactly how much comes from municipal and industry and other? And if you do, could you share those with us?
No, Congressman, I do not. We can check with some of our scientists to see if they have pulled some of that information, but I'm not aware of that. We were just looking at the agricultural and what reductions in phosphorus and nutrients and nitrogen we would see from all of the treatment on all of the ag land.
Well, if you come across any of that, take a look, would you please? Let us know. Maybe we could have our staff look at that too, and that would be helpful to us in understanding the scope of this problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before we excuse the panel, I know I have one question. I think